It's Tuesday, May 20th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, unprotected status. The U.S. Supreme Court rules that Donald Trump can remove legal immigration status from 350,000 people currently living in the U.S., all but guaranteeing more deportation raids, arrests, court hearings about those deportations, and more fear among hundreds of thousands more who thought they were safe from the violence and persecution they left behind. But before we get to that, make sure that you are following and subscribe to the show on your podcast app and on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got brand new articles going up all the time. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word, on every platform. Okay, let's get on with the episode. On Monday this week, the U.S. Supreme Court issued an unsigned opinion allowing the Trump administration to remove what's called Temporary Protected Status, or TPS, from about 350,000 Venezuelans living in the U.S. right now. Now, the order paused a ruling from a lower court, effectively ending that court's block on the White House plan to get rid of TPS for Venezuelans, although it will impact more than that. Only Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson said she would have left that lower court's order in place, and it's important to understand what TPS is, why the administration wants to get rid of it, and what it means for millions of people across the country, immigrants, people with temporary protected status, and U.S. citizens alike. So TPS has been around since 1990, and it does what it says. It gives temporary protection from being deported for someone who had to leave their home country. Now, that status has been given to people from 17 different countries over the last 35 years, but under some really specific criteria. People who can get TPS must be fleeing their home countries for a few reasons. Armed conflict is one, like Ukrainians forced from their homes during the Russian invasion. Environmental disasters, like people from Haiti who fled after the 2010 and 2021 earthquakes, epidemics like the cholera outbreak in Sudan, or other extraordinary and temporary conditions like government persecution or gang violence in places like Venezuela or El Salvador. And then the other thing to know about people who come with temporary protected status, it means they're also eligible in almost all cases for something called EAD, or Employment Authorization Documents, meaning they can work in the U.S., they can own businesses, and employ people while they're here. Now, according to a report from just a few years ago, 94% of TPS holders get their EAD and begin working, paying into the U.S. more than $1.5 billion in state, local, and federal taxes every year. And this is important to keep in mind because the opportunity of legal work is a huge driver of why many people come to the U.S., particularly from what are called the CHNV countries of Cuba, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. Now, these countries are part of that specific category of TPS holders who have been given what's known as humanitarian parole because they're fleeing their government. These immigrants often pay their own way into the U.S., or they have a sponsor already in the country, like a family member or a religious organization that helps migrants. And in most cases, they aren't allowed to come through Mexico, which means they have to come directly to the U.S., which is the government hoping that they can crack down on things like human trafficking or drug trafficking by making them do that. Now, Venezuelans fleeing their government right now make up the largest amount of TPS holders in the country. Around 350,000 people have that TPS status right now, while another 127,000 people are eligible for it. And up until this week, we're waiting to see if they could get temporary protected status. But since coming to office, the Trump administration has systematically been attacking TPS for people across the board, and that has come as a shock to a lot of those TPS holders who thought they were safe from being forced to return to dangerous places, and many of them who helped hand Trump his presidency, like Venezuelans in Florida, which has the largest population of Venezuelan immigrants in the country, and who most often support economic policies because they're fleeing a socialist dictator and hear Democrats be described as socialists by Republicans. Now, case in point, in the Florida town of Doral, which is home to a Trump resort and the largest Venezuelan-born population in the country, Trump went from losing that town by 40% in 2016 to swinging 41 points to win it in 2024, most of that propelled by TPS status given to Venezuelans under Joe Biden starting in 2021. Now, those folks can't vote, but they can campaign for someone, and they did for Donald Trump, and now those immigrants are understandably upset and frankly angry that the administration is trying to remove them from the country, as one Venezuelan woman told NPR, saying she felt, quote, beyond betrayed, and saying they used us. During the campaign, the elected officials from the Republican Party, they actually told us that he was not going to touch the documented people. They said, no, it's with undocumented people. And it's not hard to see why they thought that. First, they were being told that by people. And second, during the campaign, Trump repeatedly praised the Latino vote and voters and promised only to deport, quote, the worst of the worst. But he also spent the campaign and a lot of time in the first few months of this presidency saying countries, specifically Venezuela, were opening prisons and mental health hospitals to send these people to the U.S., which is a lie. I have talked about it before. There is just no evidence of that happening. People have gone to these countries to find out if it's happening, and it's just not. But still, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, has repeated that same lie, just like she did here back in February.
Well, the TPP program has been abused, and it doesn't have integrity right now. And folks from Venezuela that have come into this country are members of TDA. And remember, Venezuela purposely emptied out their prisons, emptied out their mental health facilities, and sent them to the United States of America. So we are ending that extension of that program, adding some integrity back into it. And this administration is evaluating all of our programs to make sure they truly are something that's to the benefit of the United States, so that they're not to the benefit of criminals.
And again, it is just not true. What it does, though, is give the administration some pretext for stripping these protections from people who thought they were safe in the U.S. And it begs the question, then, why the administration would want to do this. After, one, telling people they weren't going to do it, that these people are in the U.S. legally, the vast majority are working taxpayers, and many, many of them are supportive of the policies of this administration. So why do this? Well, there are two arguments here. The first is the one that the administration has put out there, that the belief that temporary protected status has somehow been abused by the government over the last several decades, specifically under and by Democrats. Here's J.D. Vance saying just that at the vice presidential debate last fall.
I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app, where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
So, first of all, that's not how any of this works. And J.D. Vance would know that, having been a senator. The CBP One app, which the Trump administration actually just shut down a few weeks ago, was used by people legally entering the country to seek asylum or humanitarian parole, but it didn't work like a magic wand. It was just the first step in a much longer process in immigration as laid out by the TPS law that was signed by Republican President George H.W. Bush. But still, they contend that this thing has been abused and that all these people are here somehow illegally. However, immigration experts and experts on extremism say that's not really what it's about. They say the move to end TPS is part of a larger movement on the far right to stop white people from becoming the minority in the U.S. It's part of a white nationalist lie called Great Replacement Theory. And I've talked about this before on the show because it comes up a lot in our modern politics, but really quickly, Great Replacement Theory is the idea that white people are being purposefully and systematically, quote, replaced by people of color in the United States and in Europe by governments, usually for some sort of political gain, but not always. And it is simply not true. But there is a lot of evidence to suggest that people behind the Trump administration's playbook, Project 2025, have this theory in mind when they think and talk about immigration. The Global Project Against Hate and Extremism took a look at the 900 pages of Project 2025 and found numerous instances and connections between its authors and supporters at the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, and the promotion of Great Replacement theory. That included members of a panel last fall titled Global Replacism, all about a racist book about immigrants in France. A senior fellow at Heritage wrote an article about the problem, quote, with Muslims in schools in Austria, and cited a neo-Nazi who was called immigrant settlements, brutal population replacement, and the biggest crime of the 21st century. And the organization run by Trump's new head of the Office of Management and Budget, Russell Vought, who helped to co-write parts of Project 2025 and promote it, has also promoted people who have promoted the Great Replacement theory. So the point of getting rid of TPS then, and what brings us back to the Supreme Court case, is part of this worldview, this racist worldview. And whether or not every single person advocating to end TPS believes it, this is where it comes from, and why this Supreme Court ruling is bigger than just the 350,000 people who will lose this status, even though that is a staggering number in and of itself. The Supreme Court allowing the administration to go forward with a plan that is fueled by parts or based in Great Replacement theory will allow them to end TPS for all sorts of protected groups, and they've already done that, most recently ending TPS for immigrants from Afghanistan, many of whom worked alongside U.S. and allied soldiers in the war in Afghanistan and fled to the U.S. out of fear from being killed or worse by the Taliban, and are now being told they'll have to go back. This ruling will also serve as a pretext for the administration to end things like birthright citizenship, which is in front of the Supreme Court right now, and where at least some of the conservative justices, potentially enough to get a majority, seemed sympathetic to ending it. And on top of that, it will allow the administration to continue undisclosed immigration raids in communities across the country that have led to mistaken arrests of people like Kilmar Abrega Garcia and at least 50 Venezuelan immigrants who did nothing wrong but had been deported anyway. And that was found in a study that was just released this week by the libertarian, so the right-wing group, the Cato Institute. And on top of that, none of that is mentioning that often temporary protected status holders live fully productive lives while contributing to their communities, and many, like those in Doral, Florida, have become pillars in those communities. And they've become important figures in not just local and state, but even national politics and decision-making. So losing those people, whether it's because they get deported or it's because they shrink from public life and their communities out of fear, will have an effect on a lot more people than the 800,000 who are in the U.S. and are eligible for or currently have TPS. And it means that even if you don't know someone who came to the country looking for temporary protection, your life will be affected by this Supreme Court decision. Okay, that is it for the show today. Thank you for listening. Please rate and review the show, whatever podcast app you listen to this on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications on YouTube so you don't miss out on any new videos there. Like I said at the top, subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack. It's just $5 a month. And if you don't want to do that, as always, continue to share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on X and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Granthermes, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.